Welcome, everyone, and thank you for standing by. At this time, I'd like to inform all participants that your lines will be in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference call. If you would like to ask a question over the phone line, you may press star 1 on your phone. Please remember to record your name when prompted so we know who to introduce for the question. Today's conference call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I will now turn the meeting over to our first speaker, Mr. Brian Beams. Thank you, sir. You may begin.
Thank you, Bridget. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Beams, and I am a Senior International Trade Specialist with the U.S. Department of Commerce, and my office is located in northern New Jersey. On behalf of the U.S. Commercial Service, the Connecticut, New Jersey, and California District Export Councils, and the Bureau of Industry and Security, we'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar titled License Exceptions for 600 Series. I would like to thank the speakers and participants who have joined us today as well. A couple of items to note before we get started. Be sure you are connected using both your telephone and the online WebEx platform that enables you to see the virtual or visual presentation. Second, all telephone lines are currently on mute. We will open the lines up for questions at the end of the presentation. We will also take questions submitted through the chat feature on the WebEx platform. Finally, for those on the webinar who are seeking additional in-depth export compliance education, perhaps continuous education for the compliance officers out there and attorneys, there is an upcoming virtual conference titled Complying with U.S. Export Controls beginning on May 19th until May 22nd. It is a 4-day virtual conference, first time ever, hosted by the Bureau of Industry and Security, the Organization of Women in International Trade, and the U.S. Commercial Service Office located in Irvine, California. To learn about more information, please log on to BIS's website. You can find a list of all their upcoming events, or feel welcome to email me or Tony or Anthony Sargis. Before we begin our featured presentation, I'd like to just take a minute to inform you on the federal government agency I'm with. It is called the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service. We are the trade and investment arm of the U.S. federal government. We are a division which is inside the International Trade Administration. Our mission is pretty simple. We promote U.S. exports, protect U.S. commercial interests abroad, and facilitate foreign direct investment in America. We have offices around the world. Domestically, we have over 100, and almost in every state, I believe. On the international side, we're in 70 plus countries at your embassies and consulates, or in commercial section offices. So if you're ever overseas and you need to connect with us, that's who you're going to call for. One other thing to mention is our website URL has changed. Please note that all U.S. commercial service information can now be found on www.trade.gov. Again, that's www.trade.gov. And then before we get going, these are the webinars and this is the second of 10 webinars that this export compliance series details. Please contact Tony or myself for any questions. You will hear a lot of acronyms and titles coming from Sharon about upcoming webinars. It's just how they're all intertwined. So feel welcome to join. And again, call us or contact us if you have additional questions about the upcoming webinars. I do like to now turn it over to Sharon. Sharon Cook is a Senior Export Policy Analyst for the Bureau of Industry and Security. Sharon, please begin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon Cook with the Bureau of Industry and Security. I've been with the Bureau for about 32 years, so I've got a little bit of knowledge on export controls. So today we'll be going over license exceptions for the 600 series, and if you have, questions as I go, if I didn't say something or if I said something that you don't understand or something, just, send a question in, and we'll be happy to help you with that. so let's get started. So first of all, there is a definition for license exception. So a license exception is an authorization described in Part 740 of the EAR, that's the Export Administration Regulations. And it allows you to export, re-export, or transfer in country under stated conditions items subject to the EAR that would otherwise require a license. So what that means is if there is a license requirement for your item, then there may be a license exception that will overcome that license requirement so that you don't have to submit a license application and wait for it and then ship against that license. So we'll go into some of the license exceptions, but not all of the license exceptions today. Each license exception bears a three-letter symbol, like TMP or STA or LVS, and that's just our shorthand for referring to these many license exceptions. There's a numeric code that you use when you clear your export from customs, and our codes from Commerce start with a C and have a couple digits. And as you can see, for LVS, it would be C35, and for STA, it would be C59. And one of the handouts that that Anthony sent to you has the Appendix F, which lists all of the codes. The codes are not found in the EAR, but are found in the AES regulations. And so, I don't know, Tony or Brian, can you bring up that attachment?
Sorry, sure. What attachment do you want me to bring up? Say that one more time.
The attachment for AES.
Yep. Here.
Okay, this is Appendix F of the AES regulations, and if you scroll down, well, if you scroll down, you could see the codes that are in it. I believe it was emailed to you. And you can go back to the slides. So, there we go. So when you get the email, you'll have this attachment, and you can see all the codes that are used for license exceptions for when you clear your shipment. And it's also used on the for your electronic export information for Census Bureau documents. If one or more license exception applies, you would use the least restrictive license exception. So yes, your transaction may actually qualify for more than one license exception. So you want to look them all and just do the one that's least restrictive to you. And if a license exception allows re-export, when you read it, you'll see, oh, this authorizes exports and re-exports, but it doesn't mention transfers, then just know that if it allows re-exports, it also allows transfers, even though the words are not there. So, because transfers are sort of a latecomer to the regulation, so those words didn't actually get put everywhere that they should have. Okay, so why would anyone use a license exception? License exceptions release qualifying transaction or shipments from a licensing requirement. So obviously they take shorter time to use. You know, you don't have to wait for a license to be issued by the Bureau of Industry and Security. You can just look and review all the criteria for your license exception, and if your transaction meets that criteria, then you can just use it. It's intended to facilitate trade when circumstances don't warrant specific advance written approval by BIS. And here I say that there are 17 license exceptions listed in Part 740. Actually, there's 18, but we're going to lose one of our license exceptions in June, and I'll tell you more about that later. The provisions can be very detailed, so read carefully. All right, here are some statistics on how people have been using, how often, I guess, people have been using the license exceptions. These statistics were given to us from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection electronic information, and it goes through February 2020. And as you can see, that big green portion is our license exception for encryption products. And I won't be covering ENC, the encryption products. Usually that's a separate seminar that's given by our encryption folks because it's very detailed. However, putting ENC aside, you can see that license exception TEMP, or temporary export, and STA and RPL are our top 3 license exceptions. And once I explain these to you, you'll understand why these are the top 3. Okay, so these are the things that you need to understand before we get into a particular license exception. These are the things you need to understand about license exceptions in general. Before you consider using a license exception, you should have a license requirement. You'd think that this would be basic, but sometimes in the heat of a transaction, people forget that there has to be a license requirement before they want to consider a license exception. You know, some sales manager says, oh, we need to get the shipment out quick, and then you start looking for license exceptions for it. And then I'll get a call, and somebody will say, well, you know, does my shipment, you know, qualify for license exception LVS? And I'll ask them, well, what is the ECCN, or the export control classification number of your product, and where are you shipping it to? You know, who's the end user, what's the end use? I'll ask all these questions that would determine a license requirement, and we'll come to find out that a license isn't even required for their item. So make sure that there's a license requirement before you start considering license exceptions. There are restrictions that apply to all license exceptions. These are found in a separate section of the regulations from the individual license exception sections. So you'll see more about that in a minute. And besides those restrictions, there's also specific limitations within each license exception. So you'll have to look at both. You need a awareness of the country groups to help you better understand and apply the license exception provisions. Okay. I don't know who's helping me today, Brian or Tony, but if one of you could bring up my handout on the license exception description.
Yeah, this one's a little cut off, but we did send it out to everyone, so they should have it as well.
Okay, perfect.
And Sharon, can you see it on the screen?
No, not yet.
Okay, hold on one second.
Okay, there we go. Okay. As Tony was saying, that this is cut off, but you can see on here, this is a description of all the license exceptions that we have. And in the brief descriptions, you can see sometimes we mention, like, for instance, 740.16, additional permissive re-exports. You can see it authorizes the re-exports from country group A1 countries or Hong Kong. And then, you know, all of these license exceptions are geared towards a specific country grouping. Some of them are for D1, some of them are for country group B, and you'll see as we get further in how that can become helpful to know the country groups. Okay, can we go back to this slide, please? Thank you. All right, so if your transaction is eligible for more than one license exception, again, select the least restrictive one. Okay, and for license exceptions for embargoed countries, yes, there are license exceptions for embargoed countries. You're going to first want to look at Part 746 in our regulations, and in there are different parts or different sections that cover each embargo, like the embargo for Cuba. And when you look in that section for Cuba, you will see that there is a paragraph dedicated for license exceptions, and it will tell you which license exceptions you may use for Cuba. So first look in 746 if you're shipping to an embargoed destination to see if you qualify for a license exception, and then go to 740 to see if you meet all the criteria for that license exception. Okay. So right here is an ECCN, typical ECCN. It's OA978. It's for police helmets and shields. Then you have come to a section that has the license requirements. And in the license requirements, you'll see that what is circled there is the column that you need to go to find your license requirement. And this would be in supplement number 1 to Part 738, the Commerce Country Chart. Okay? And this is not the country groups, but the country chart. Okay? And before we leave this slide, I wanted to just show you also, you see the list-based license exceptions. Not all 18 of our license exceptions are listed there. And NA stands for not applicable. So these are the list-based license exceptions, and they're called list-based because their criteria for eligibility is keyed into or tied into the technical parameters of the item. So that's why it's listed here in the actual item paragraph. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the previous slide, the ECCN said for the license requirement, you have to look at CC1. So if we were going to ship those helmets to Costa Rica, we would slide over and then look under CC1. And if there's an X there, that means that there is a license requirement for that item when shipping it to Costa Rica. Now that you have a license requirement, now what you do is you try to find a license exception that will overcome that license requirement. And you also see that I have circled in red for Cuba that there are no X's for Cuba. And that's how it usually is for embargoed or terrorist countries. It'll just refer you to another part of the regulations. So it says see Part 746 of the EAR to determine whether a license is required. So, again, sometimes there won't be X's. It'll just tell you to go somewhere and look. All right, so this explains our country groups. We have country group A, which are our regime members, meaning these are members of global or multilateral regimes, like the Wassenaar Arrangement, which it oversees or sees these guidelines for national security or conventional arms. And so these members are listed here in Country Group A. And then you have country group B, which are less restricted countries. Back in the day when we had the Cold War, the world used to be split in half from free world countries and communist bloc countries. And country group B stems from those free world countries. Country group C is reserved, some say, because we have no average countries, only above average or below average countries. So country group D are countries of concern. So if the U.S. has a concern with a country because it warrants or it has some kind of national security threat or could threaten the United States, then it would be in our national security column of country group D. If we feel threatened from them for a chemical reason, they'll be in the chemical column, or a nuclear reason, then they'll be in the nuclear column. And then we have country group E, which are embargoed or terror-supporting countries. Now, if it were me, if I was the king of the regulations, I would have skipped E and just put country group F, and read this like a report card and put them in there. All right, so Tony, could you bring up the handout for the country groups, please?
Yes, we can do that right now. 1 second.
Okay.
Do you see
so
that?
Here you can, yeah, I can see that. Thank you.
Perfect.
Country group A, you can see it has X's and it has listed across it Savassanar, A1 is Savassanar participating in the Missile Tech and Australia group and Nuclear Suppliers group. A5 and A6 are specifically related to a license exception STA, or strategic authorization. And those are authorization groups under those license exceptions. So they're just not titled because they don't have, they're not part of the regime group. But that's what that is. And then I don't know if I can scroll down any further on that.
Yeah, Sharon, I can scroll down a little, but are you looking for a specific country?
I was just looking at a different country group, like country group D.
Yeah, I could just go to the next slide on this.
Oh, the next slide turns the page?
Yeah, next slide turns the page.
Oh, cool.
I'm on page 2 right now.
Okay, so let's go to page D. Okay, so page D, or country group D, these are our countries of concern. So you can see all the countries of concern for the U.S. for national security reasons are found in D1. And for nuclear, D2, chem bio, D3, missile technology, D4. And D5 came over from our U.S. munitions list, State Department regulations in 126.1 countries. That is related to our U.S. arms embargoed countries. And for 600 series, these are especially linked because you cannot ship 600 series to D5 countries. And that is one of the criteria for each of the license exceptions. When you're using license exceptions for 600 series, you can't ship to these D5 countries. Okay.
You want me to go back, Sharon, to the presentation?
Yeah. Some people can't see the slide. Okay.
Slide back here to this presentation. All right.
Yeah. Even if you can't see it, you were emailed it so you can look it over. Okay. So going on. There are restrictions, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, there are restrictions that are on all the license exceptions, which are in a separate section from the sections that describe the license exceptions. Okay, you can see on this slide, I have the table of contents for Part 740. And you can see that the license restrictions on all license exceptions are found in 740.2. Okay, so make sure when you're figuring out whether you're eligible for a license exception that you not only read your section, like if you were seeing if you were eligible for license exception GBS, you would read 740.4, but you would also read 740.2. Okay, you always read 740.2 in conjunction with your section that's specific to your license exception. Okay.
Sharon, we did have one question. Sorry to interrupt. We did have one question that came in, and I can pop up that slide again, was regarding if you can repeat what A5 and A6, the meaning of that. And I think it's on our the 740 form here, which I'll have to pop up. A5 and A6. I don't see anything listed here on what that, the description of that.
Okay. A5 and A6 do not have titles for their columns because they are not related to a regime, a multilateral regime. They are related to license exception STA. Okay, and you'll see, I've got a slide further on in the presentation where you'll see a direct link to A5 and A6. You'll see how it links up with STA authorization. Okay?
All right, perfect. I'm going to go back to your presentation now. Give me a second.
Okay, thanks. All right, so for the license restrictions, it's a pretty long part that you have to read, or a pretty long section. And some of the things that are restrictions, here are some examples of some of the restrictions. You can't use a license exception to ship goods to a person or company that's on the denied persons list. Okay, that's the denial orders. Or if you yourself are on the denied persons list, you can't use a license exception. Those privileges have been taken away. Okay. You can't use a license exception to support proliferation activities, meaning if you're planning on shipping goods to somebody who's building some massive weapon of mass destruction, whether it be nuclear or chemical or biological or whatever, you can't use a license exception to do that. All right. Next one is violates any orders, terms, or conditions. Now, orders refers to like denial orders or general orders. And then we have terms. Terms are the criteria that you find under license exceptions. And then conditions are the conditions that you would have on a license, a validated license or an issued license. So you can't use a license exception to overcome any of these. All right, if you are shipping something and you know that it's in violation of the EAR or that the person is going to use the goods in violation of the EAR, you cannot use a license exception for that. Okay. And you can't use license exceptions to overcome restrictions on certain ECCNs and destinations. Okay, and those are all listed in 740.2. For instance, missile technology items, okay, items on the CCL that have an MT control, missile technology. Most MT items aren't eligible for license exceptions. And that's not because BIS is mean. That's because the international regime or multilateral regime group, the missile tech control regime, that's one of their rules, is that if you sign up to be on our regime, which, 40 some odd countries are participants of that regime, including the United States, that if you sign up for this regime, then you are going to require a license for all the goods that they decide need to be on their list. And so we do that. However, there are some exceptions to that rule, but they're very few, and they're mostly for safety of life. So, okay, so let's move on. Okay, there are some specific restrictions for 600 series items within 740.2. Defense articles have additional restrictions in that you can't use any of, well, I shouldn't say any, you can't use all of the license exceptions that are in Part 740. You can only use these 7 that are listed. Okay, and it's prohibited. You can't use a license exception for major defense equipment sold under a contract exceeding certain values, and I believe that value is like $25 million. And then the prohibited, for prohibited D5 countries, the U.S. arms embargoed countries. Remember I pointed that out on the country chart? You cannot use license exceptions to ship 600 series to D5 countries. All right, so there are some new license restrictions that were just added to 740.2 because we got guns over on the Commerce Control List now. And so these new restrictions are applied to ECCN's OA501 firearms and OA502 shotguns. And the restriction applies for parts or components or a part or component that is not subject to the ITAR but would otherwise meet criteria in the USML, that's the U.S. Munitions List, Category 1H2. Okay, basically all those words mean if you're sending parts that are specially designed for conversion of a semi-automatic firearm to a fully automatic firearm, you cannot do it under a license exception. Okay, that's pretty easy to understand. Okay, and the other new restriction that's added to 740.2 relates to sending these firearms to narcotics trafficking people or foreign narcotics kingpin people. So, and you'll find those people on the OFAC, or the Office of Foreign Assets Control, Specially Designated Nationals and Blocked Persons List. So they're designated by those letters that you see there. Okay, I see that somebody asked me to explain what 600 series items are. 600 series items are items that were controlled on the State Department U.S. Munitions List, and then it was decided by the agencies that they no longer warrant control over on the State Department Munitions List any longer, and so they shifted them and transferred them over to the Commerce Control List. And so once they came over to the Commerce Control List, they're still military items, but they just don't warrant the level of control that the other items that are still on the U.S. Munitions List warrant. And so that's where they are. They're in the Commerce Control List. And we put them under ECCNs that have a 600 in their number. Like, let's say, I don't know, 5A620. Okay, that's just a made-up number, but that's like a 600 series number where the third digit is a 6. Okay, and that's how you recognize them. They're higher level controlled ECCNs that are military items. Okay, so moving on. Reporting requirements. So there are reporting requirements that apply to license exceptions sometimes. The Bosnar Arrangement which is the arrangement that deals with conventional arms, has a requirement for its participants. And this requirement pertains to sensitive list items. In the Wassenaar arrangement, there are 3 levels of lists. There's the basic list, the sensitive list, and the very sensitive list. And the sensitive list is a subset of the basic list, and the very sensitive list is a subset of the sensitive list. But these are goods on the sensitive list that people find are very dangerous. And so what they ask is that we report all the participants of Wassenaar, all the country participants have to report whenever they issue licenses or approvals for these sensitive list items. So we report back to Wassenaar. And so the U.S., in keeping with this reporting requirement, we don't know when you are exporting goods under license exceptions because that's a self-validating type authorization. And so when you ship under any of these license exceptions, then you have to report back to BIS that you shipped your particular sensitive list item under this license exception, and you report back to BIS so that we can report back to Wassenaar. And that's one of the reporting requirements for license exceptions. And you can see it doesn't pertain to all license exceptions, just these ones listed. And also the license exception E and C, which has to do with encryption, has its own reporting requirements. So you have to watch out for that too. All right, so here we are, now that we've gone over all the basic information about license exceptions, license exception restrictions, which license exceptions you can use for 600 series items, reporting requirements, all those things. Now here we are at our first license exception that we're going to go over today. This one's called LVS, or Limited Value Shipment. It's found in Part 740.3 of our Export Administration Regulations. Low-value shipments are not supposed to be used. This license exception is not supposed to be used as a like everyday use type thing. It's for emergencies, or that was the intent of it. It's for when something is needed in an emergency or very quickly, and like a part or a component type thing. And so that's why it's based on a low value or low dollar value, okay? Because we don't expect you to send like 1,000 parts out. We expect you to send that one part out or the 2 parts out that you need to get your operations going again. The eligibility is based on the net value of the commodities included in the same order. Okay. It is for commodities only, so you may not ship software or technology under LVS. It is for country group B countries only. And the total value of exports per calendar year to the same ultimate or intermediate consignee of commodities classified under a single ECCN may not exceed 12 times the LVS value limit for that ECCN. Okay, so if you were exporting an ECCN and its limited value shipment was $1,500, then the limit for the year to that same end user or consignee would be like $18,000 for the year. And so if you tend to use LVS a lot and to the same end user, then it would behoove you to come up with some program to keep track of where your levels are for each ECCN that you're sending to this end user so that you don't go over the calendar year cap. Okay, and also it says no conspiring to split orders. Okay, if you and Fred, use LVS a lot, and Fred sends you orders on this a lot, you cannot conspire with Fred over in Spain, okay, to split your orders and say, hey, Fred, if you just give me an order that's below $1,500, then I could ship it to you LVS. That is conspiring to get around the Export Administration regulations, which in itself is a violation. So I would not do that. Here's another license exception section of ECCN 3A001, which is electronic components. You can see this one is kind of convoluted. It's very complex, this section. And you can see that usually LVS values, there's only one LVS dollar value per ECCN, but this one has 3. Okay, so you can see for paragraph C of 3A001 that the dollar value is $1,500. Okay, so what would be the value for paragraph G of 3A001? Okay. Anybody know? Yep, it's 3,000. Okay, 3,000. All right, so this one's a very complex one, but now you know how to use it. All right, moving on to license exception TEMP. Temporary is our #1 license exception, and you'll see why. There are many paragraphs within 740.9 that give different authorizations. These are some of them and not all of them. Okay? So, tools of trade. Let's say that you have a customer and their equipment broke down. So you're going to send a serviceman out there to fix it. And he brings with him a tester. Okay, so that tester that he's taking out of the country with him is a tool of trade. Okay, so if that tester happens to be controlled on our Commerce Control List, he can overcome the license requirement with this license exception. Okay. So this license exception would cover that. Now, I know many of you travel with your laptops out of the country. Those laptops are subject to the EAR, but usually do not require a license unless it's going to a terrorist supporting country. However, the software on it or technology on the laptop may be controlled. Okay, that technology could be covered by this license exception TEMP. Sometimes your company wants to send a piece of equipment out for exhibition or demonstration. That can be done under TEMP. Sometimes you're a contractor for some military organization and you need to take personal protective equipment like a helmet or body armor or a mask for chemical weapons. That can be taken out under TEMP. If you're a U.S. facility and you're shipping parts or assemblies out and they're going to be assembled by your subsidiary or affiliate, then you can send those things out and then they can send them back to you under TEMP. Let's go back to that repairman. The repairman goes out and takes his tool, but what if he needs parts? So he takes a box of parts that he thinks he may need to repair that piece of equipment, and he takes it under a kit of replacement parts. So he can temporarily take those out, and then when he selects one of those parts to put into the piece of equipment to leave there, that part is no longer under TEMP because it's not coming back to the U.S. Okay? Then you're going to want to look at license exception RPL to cover that part that is staying. But the kit of replacement parts, most of them are coming back, so that's covered by TEMP. And then you have inspection or calibration. Let's say that you bought a foreign piece of equipment, and that equipment needs to go out to that foreign country to be inspected or calibrated. You can do that under TEMP as well. Let's say that you have assembly of parts in Mexico. Okay? You have an assembly company down there. You can do that under TEMP. Okay? I think that's, well, media. If you're in the media business, you can take all your broadcast equipment out under TEMP. So there's a number of provisions under TEMP that you can use. Okay, all this slide I'm not going to read to you, but this is the provisions of how you take your technology out of the country temporarily when you're on a business trip. You have to make sure that it's secured so that when you're reaching back to a cloud or to a business network, that it won't accidentally be released to unauthorized users. Okay, and it says that you can, send it to employees, your employees, even if they're foreign, but they're your employees. It talks about that as well. All right, so TEMP also covers temporary imports to the U.S. So let's say that you ordered a foreign item and it comes in a box and you open it and it's not the right item. Now, to send it back is an export, and the item is controlled on the Commerce Controlled List. And now what do? You send it back under TEMP, which is return of unwanted foreign origin item. In transit, sometimes you have something that's going through the United States. Maybe you export it, or it's from Canada and it's coming across the border and then back out again. It's going in transit. That can be covered by TEMP. Temporary demos or exhibitions of foreign items in the United States, that can happen under TEMP. If you're a software developer and you need to send your software out to be beta tested and then come back, that's under TEMP as well. All right, so can TEMP be used for remote access to U.S. servers? Yes, provided the other terms of A3 are met. Is taking an encrypted device out of the U.S. an export? Yes, it is an export, and this is how you would do it. Okay, on to RPL. RPL is for service and replacement of parts and equipment. There are two main authorizations. One is for one-for-one replacement of parts, components, and accessories. And it also allows 600 series parts to repair EAR or ITAR items under certain conditions. So sometimes you have a piece of equipment, a military piece of equipment that was authorized under the State Department license. And that equipment, though, has EAR parts because many parts came from the State Department and are now under 600 series ECCNs under the EAR. So if that part breaks down, sometimes you can use RPL to do a one-for-one replacement. Okay, and then servicing and replacement of commodities and software. Sometimes there is a piece of equipment that you sold and it breaks down. And so they send it back to you to be either serviced or replaced. that can happen under RPL as long as it was legally exported to that person. So you have to be able to determine whether it was legally exported to the person. And there is special record keeping. When you repair the item, you cannot enhance it. Okay? You can repair it, and sometimes there are parts, not the same exact part that is in the equipment, but as long as that newer version of the part does not give more capability beyond the criteria of that ECCN that was used to ship out that item, then you can use RPL to do a one-for-one replacement of the part or replace the equipment. All right. Here we are at technology and software unrestricted. This is another license exception that has many parts to it or many authorizations. If you export an item and you need to send operational technology or software like software updates, bug fixes, you can do that under TSU. Sales technology for bids under TSU. Mass market software subject to general software note, that's encryption mass market software, or unrestricted encryption source code, that all falls under TSU. Various technology and software, including training, that is the minimum necessary for operation, maintenance, or repair of lawfully exported items, happens under TSU, and this corresponds, each of these provisions here correspond with something that was authorized under ITAR. And we did that so that when the 600 series came over, that they would have the same restrictions, capabilities, and license exceptions that they had under ITAR. So that's what this is. Okay, Tony, did you want to?
Yeah, just going to mention a couple things. I know we've started a few minutes late, so we'll probably go over a little bit. We shared the documents that Sharon sent to us. I sent those out, but we'll also get once the recording is finalized for today and for Tuesday, we'll get those out to everyone along with the PDF versions of the presentations. And then we're gonna continue to move along here on the presentation, and then hopefully we'll have time for a couple questions at the end. So I'll turn it back to Sharon.
Okay, thanks. I did have a question. Somebody was confused about software on a laptop. The software, well, the technology on the laptop would be under TEMP. The software that's running the laptop, the encryption software, would be under ENC. It's usually mass market software under ENC. All right, going on to STA. Okay, so STA is a broad authorization. It's one of our newest license exceptions. It's number 2 as the ones that are being used today by exporters. It's a broad authorization to selected countries with export control systems in place. So these are like-minded countries. There are 2 tiers of authorization, and they're split up by countries. And it requires the consignee statement acknowledging U.S. export control requirements prior to export. And there are a list of ECCNs that are ineligible for license exception STA under this section 740.20B2. So make sure that you look at that list to make sure that your ECCN is not in that list before you use it. Okay, remember we talked about country group A5 and A6, the columns that didn't have a heading to them. Here they are again, and these are all the countries. You can see A6 is 8 destinations and A5 are 36 destinations. These are the 2 different authorizations within STA. These are the destinations that you're allowed to ship to. C1, paragraph C1 under 740.20 correlates to A5. and C2, paragraph C2 correlates to A6. Okay, so if you're trying to use license exception, STA, be aware that it will overcome license requirements for these reasons for control, okay? NS, national security, and CB is the chemical and biological, NP is the nonproliferation or nuclear nonproliferation, regional stability, crime control, and sensitive items. Okay, that's C1. It overcomes many reasons for control, okay? But C2 only overcomes the one NS reason for control. And it has less countries in it as well. Okay, so how can you tell when you're looking on the Commerce Control List whether your ECCN is eligible for STA? You saw in previous slides, I showed you the ECCN, and it had the, like that very convoluted one for 3A001, where it said GBS yes, or CIB yes, or LVS, these dollar values. There's no positive way on an ECCN to tell whether it's STA eligible, okay, except when you look at the ECCN, look and see if there's a paragraph that says special conditions for STA. If it has that, then you know that obviously it is eligible for STA, but it has these restrictions, okay? If you don't see this paragraph, then it's possible that you're STA eligible, that ECCN is eligible, but make sure that you look in 740.20B2 to see if it's listed in those ineligible ECCNs, okay? And then make sure that the reason for control list in the ECCN is covered by STA authorization. All right, so for STA and 600 series items, the end user must be a U.S. government or a government of a country in country group A5. It has to be for the development, production, or service of an item in country group A5 or the United States that is ultimately to be used for U.S. government or a government country in A5 or sent to a person in the United States. So mainly, the people that use STA, they are producers of items. Let's say they're producers of airplanes. Okay, so they're not shipping an airplane out of the U.S. What they're doing is they're shipping pieces and parts to build an airplane. So they're shipping, you know, to destination A in the UK, and then they build a piece. And then they ship to Germany to maybe make the engine. And then they ship to, you know, I don't know, somewhere else, Austria or wherever. And so they're shipping to all these different destinations under STA to produce a product. And at the end, when the whole plane is built, they are going to give that plane either to somewhere, some U.S. government person, you know, or they're going to be giving it to a government of an A5 country, or they're going to be sending it back to the United States. Okay, these are the only end users that you can have for 600 series. But all along the way, they're using STA to move it from country to country to country to build the product. Once the product is done, completed, here we have a completed airplane, then they don't use STA to ship the airplane from, let's say it finished off in Spain, okay, but the A5 government that actually bought the plane is in the UK. So they finished, put the last piece on the aircraft in Spain, and then they want to ship the plane to UK at this point. They don't use STA now. Now they shift over to license exception gov, okay? There's a license exception gov that allows for shipments to A5 countries. Okay, so let's get on with more criteria for STA. Okay, so the parties that are participating in this STA thing has to be a non-U.S. parties have to be previously approved on state or commerce license. Okay, so if the party appeared on a state approval, any type of approval by state or a commerce license, then that party's okay to use STA. The consignee statement must also address the ultimate end user restrictions for 600 series, and you'll see that when I bring those up. If you have any of these ECCNs, your item falls under the classification for any of these 4 ECCNs, then you have to ask for permission to use STA first before you use it. Okay, so what are the responsibilities under STA? For the exporter, they have to provide ECCNs to the consignee. So when you ship, you have to tell them what the ECCN is. For the consignee, they have to provide a consignee statement to the exporter. And for the exporter, they have to obtain the statement. And number 4, they notify the consignee that the shipment or specific items within the shipment are under STA. Okay. Let's say you have 5 items on that you're shipping that day. On your invoice, you're going to mark item number 3 is under STA, and you're going to put the ECCN of that. And so number 5 is you keep records showing which shipments belong to each consignee statement. And the consignee also has to do the same thing. Okay, so finally, here is the consignee statement. So when you're using STA, you have to get the statement from the consignee, and they have to agree to all this. The ones in red are the ones that specifically pertain to 600 series. So if your goods aren't 600 series, you only have to do the ones in blue. But if you're 600 series, then you have to do all the ones in blue plus the ones in red. All right, so this is just a summary of all the STA criteria, okay? So the ultimate government end use, or is the ultimate government end use required? For 600 series, yes. For other things, no. Always limited to country group A5, 600 series, yes. Eligibility request required, yes, for these 4 ECCNs. Must the foreign parties have been on a previous approval? Yes, for 600 series. Does prior consignee statement require agreement to permit U.S. government end-use checks? Yes, if the consignee is not the government of an A5 country. Okay, on our BIS website, we have an interactive tool, decision tool, that helps you decide whether you're eligible for STA. And it takes you through step-by-step questions, and you can get to it from the front page by going to the exporter portal. When you're using STA, the clearance process, remember to report the STA transaction details in an AES prior to departure. Failure to do so is a violation of the BIS Export Administration regulations and the census regulations. Upon completion of filing the transaction in AES, you will receive an internal transaction number from AES, and then you're going to annotate that on your bill of lading or airway bill or commercial document. The code that you use to clear it under the electronic export information is C59 for STA. And EEI transaction and AES under license exception STA are not eligible for any AES reporting exemption. Okay, so here's some news for license exceptions. BIS published a final rule on April 28th that will remove license exception CID, civilian end users. There is a delayed effective date, a 60-day delayed effective date, so this becomes effective June 29th this summer. There is a savings clause for shipments that are en route that goes through July 27th. And we also published a rule to modify license exception additional permissive re-exports, APR. This rule was also published on April 28th. The comment period ends on the 29th. You can comment on regulations.gov using ID number BIS 2020-0010. And what this proposal will do is remove countries in country group D1 as a category of eligible destinations for national security controlled items. Okay. So, in summary, make sure your transaction requires a license before you start looking for a license exception. Before going to a specific license exception, make sure there are no general restrictions applicable to all license exceptions. This is found in 740.2. And each exception is unique, so make sure you meet all of the criteria for the license exception before you use it. Here's our contact information. We have an East Coast and a West Coast office. If you need to reach State Department, there's a phone number for them, and for OFAC, there's a phone number. For our encryption division, if you want to use license exception EMC, there's the number for them. And do you have any questions?
Thank you. To parties on the phone lines, if there are any questions or comments, you can press *1 on your phone. Please remember to record your name. Again, if you'd like to ask a question over the phone line, please press *1 on your phone. Please remember to record your name so we know who to introduce. You can also chat your question or send the question through the Q&A option on the WebEx. We'll wait a moment for any responses.
Sharon, while we wait, I just want to thank you again for coming on and getting into the weeds with us on this topic. It's always educational and greatly appreciated. I know a lot of my clients work with the EAR every day, and it can get confusing for smaller shops and even experienced export compliance officers in those medium and large-sized companies.
Well, it's a pleasure to come out. I enjoyed talking to the people about, what's eligible, what they're eligible for. They don't want to waste time waiting for a license when they're eligible for a license exception. So this is a great way to go.
Yeah, I agree. Bridget, do we have anybody on the phone lines wanting to ask a question?
Yes, we have one response. It's from Bob Lombard. Your line is open.
Hi, hello. I have a question. Are there any items that are exempt from TMP? Are there any ECCNs where you cannot use TMP?
Well, there are some specific ECCNs that you're not allowed to use license exception for. They're listed in 740.2. Some categories, like sometimes crime control or missile technology controlled items, so you have to look at the restrictions before you try to use it.
Thank you.
All right, in just another moment, we had another question come up. Let me get the name.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to open the line, and I'm going to play your recorded name. I can't quite understand the recording, and I apologize. If that's
Okay.
your recording, your line is open.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I have a question. Is there any change on the sections driven by the recent USA-Brazil technology safety agreement related to missile control technology?
Okay, any of the trade agreements that happen usually don't affect the Export Administration regulations directly. So I can't, say that there's no change, but I would assume that there aren't any.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Bridget, anything else? Or anyone else?
I don't have any further questions on the phone line.
Great. I just want to thank again our speaker, Sharon Cook. You have her information if you want to reach out to her. And I also want to thank all the participants. We appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please email Tony or myself. And other than that, everybody have a safe and stay well.
Thank you all for your participation in today's conference. That will conclude the call. You may now disconnect. Thank you.